Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Rich Sports Talk. And we have a fun one for you today. But before we begin, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button so you can see all of our latest content. Don't forget, we have super chats now. So whenever you want to comment in one of our live streams, you can instantly jump the line. You can also check us out wherever podcasts are available and streaming. But today we're going to mix it up a little bit and we're going to go down memory lane, and not necessarily a good memory lane, as I've talked about doing this for a little bit, but finally, I'm going to dive into this. For those of you new to the channel, I do a lot of New York Jets and NFL draft content, so I thought I'd combine a little bit of both. And today we are going to grade every Joe Douglas draft pick. And again, considering Joe had almost 6 years as general manager, there is a lot. So let's go over some of the ground rules for this. I'm going to grade every pick on a pick-by-pick basis, and each is going to be weighted slightly. Now, again, if it is a day 3 pick, I tend to be more lenient with those picks because, again, those are more filling out depth. They're more shots in the dark. I really look hard. I grade harder the first round picks, second and third round picks, because those are your money picks. Those are the picks you really have to hit on and do an effective job. So if it's a day 3 miss, I tend to be a little bit more lenient. I also look at who was on the board. Was it a position of need? Was it a player that probably would have been an upgrade over the current selection? So at the end of every single draft, I will give you a grade that I gave the draft. And at the end of the video, I will give you my overall Joe Douglas draft grade. So make sure to buckle in and let us kick it off with the 2020 NFL draft. And the Jets and Joe Douglas's resume are on the clock. So we start off with our first pick. It is Mekhi Becton. Now, Becton's grade for the 2020 draft class, I gave this an F. Look, the Jets needed a tackle. This has caused a domino effect for years for the Jets missing on this pick. They had an all-pro potential tackle in Tristan Wirfs on the board, decided to go with Becton. Becton, of course, wasn't healthy. Becton now playing guard for the Eagles, so didn't get to a second contract, struggled, injuries. This was just a massive whiff. And because of this whiff, the Jets' offensive line has basically been shambles into this year as they've tried to patch together offensive tackles from Dwayne Brown, basically George Fant, everything in the middle. So this was a massive whiff right now. And to not only the tackle, you also look at this as an incredibly talented draft class and arguably the best receiver draft class we've seen in a long time. Just to point this out, guys that were on the board that the Jets could have taken at wide receiver. And again, I know they needed a tackle, but there were great receivers like CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, and Jerry Jeudy on the clock that the Jets could have also selected instead of Mekhi Becton. Now, why is this important? Because the Jets would take a receiver in this draft. They would just wait until round number 2 when they would select Denzel Mims. Now, for Mims, a little bit of history. The Jets had the opportunity to take him with the 48th pick. However, the Jets traded back 59, so they traded back 11 spots. And even though they brought in Denzel Mims was a massive failure for the New York Jets, just over 600 yards in his career and 0 touchdowns. Just to give you an idea, a couple of interesting players on the board at this time the Jets could have taken: Chase Claypool, Trevon Diggs, Jalen Hurts, and Van Jefferson. There's a lot of good players here in this draft that were on the board, especially at the wide receiver and dynamic playmakers. But instead, the Jets drafted a player that couldn't find the end zone. The Jets would then have 2 picks in round 3. How would they do? Well, the first one was the better of the 2. It was Ashtyn Davis. I guess the silver lining is he's the only Jet to technically in this class get a second contract with the team, which I guess says something. Look, Ashtyn Davis, I gave this a C-. He's been a decent safety. He's contributed on special teams. He hasn't been a complete bust, but again, it's a very disappointing pick considering that you were hoping to get a starting caliber safety here, but instead the Jets end up just getting a good role player who likely will not be on the team in 2025. And if you're saying, well, that's a little bit lenient, well, I kind of did it for our next pick. Jabari Zuniga. Jabari Zuniga had 1 sack and was out of the league in 3 years. Not great when you also had guys like Jonathan Greenard on the board, who has 33 sacks, and Alex Highsmith, who has 32.5 career sacks in the NFL. This was a bad pick. Zuniga could never get on the field, and this really is a ugly draft class. And believe it or not, it just gets even more frustrating. In the fourth round, the Jets would kick off that round, one of 3 picks with La'Mical Perine. Perine played 14 games in the NFL, 0 touchdowns and 263 yards. So if you're keeping score, the Jets running back and receiver that they drafted in the first 4 rounds of this draft combined for absolutely 0 touchdowns and just under 900 total yards of offense. Not exactly a great start. And again, I know it was the COVID year, but still, this was a head scratcher, but not as big as one of the biggest head scratchers that we've ever seen, and that was James Morgan. At the time, it was said that James Morgan was drafted to, quote, help Sam Darnold have another veteran presence in the room to help him develop and study the playbook, because James Morgan was a very smart player. Instead of using that 4th round pick to go and get a player that could help, offensive line depth potentially, another receiver, more running back depth. Like, this was an opportunity to add more depth, add some more pieces in this draft. But instead, the Jets decided to go with a quarterback who they never were going to play, but decided to use a 4th round pick when they could have potentially gotten James Morgan for a 7th round pick, maybe even as an undrafted free agent, just a complete lift. Now, this one is the hardest one for me. This is Cameron Clark. So Cameron Clark is an interesting one. I gave this a D because this was a versatile tackle that came out. This was a pick I really loved. And the reason I didn't give this an F was because Clark was trending in the right way until he had a career-ending injury. That is something out of the control of Joe Douglas. I was debating whether to give this an incomplete, but still, they took a shot on Cameron Clark. I thought it was still probably one of my favorite picks in this draft, which isn't saying much, but still a guy that they were hoping to be a valuable depth piece ended up not being able to make it to the second contract. The 5th round brought arguably the best pick, which is Bryce Hall. Now, again, I gave this a B. He's an NFL caliber player, still playing in the National Football League. Finding NFL bodies here at round 5, I automatically bumped the grade up a little bit more. And really, this was the best pick the Jets had in the entire draft. I mean, he's still technically in the NFL, and a lot of these guys aren't even in the league anymore. Then we get to our final pick, which is Braden Mann, who many people blame for the Jets not getting Trevor Lawrence. Look, I gave this a D. I didn't want to give this an F. The reason I gave it a D is, look, he's still punting in the league. That's something. He's someone that's still showing he's an NFL caliber player, 1 of 32. Again, not a great punter in the league. Would have liked to see maybe the Jets hold out to get him as a priority free agent at the end of the draft or as an undrafted free agent. I guess the one interesting footnote for this entire draft was that the best Jet player wasn't even drafted. It was Bryce Huff as an undrafted free agent. Look, I always gave Joe Douglas a feather in his cap for finding him as an undrafted free agent. I had a 3rd round grade on Huff coming out, and again, turned into a 10-sack player. Now, it hasn't worked out for the Eagles, but still seeing what they got, that they did a better job in the undrafted market than they did in the draft, was not good. And look, I gave this 2020 draft an F. I gave this an F because you missed on a franchise tackle. You had an opportunity to get a really great tackle. It's led to a trickle-down effect that has basically impacted this team for half of a decade. You missed on wide receiver on a alarming trend that we are going to see continue for playmakers. You got some decent depth in the secondary, but other than secondary depth, this draft was just woof. Now we move to 2021. The Jets selected Zach Wilson with the 2nd overall pick. I give this an F. A part of me was debating whether to get a D- because my problem I looked at is the Jets need a quarterback, but who were you taking in this draft now in retrospect? You look at all the guys that have gone in this draft, they're all on different teams. Trevor Lawrence even feels a bit trending the wrong way. But look, I gave this ultimately an F for this reason, because the excuse I think that Joe Douglas and the staff will make, well, it was the COVID year. It was a weird year. We couldn't really judge the quarterbacks. But the problem is, if that's your reasoning, you had Sam Darnold under contract. You could have punted down the road. You could have traded that number 2 pick for a boatload of prospects. Or heck, you could have loaded up and been smart and said, look, we don't love the quarterbacks this year. Let's get 1st-round picks next year. That's what the Eagles did when they weren't sure about Jalen Hurts. It worked, but then they had 1st-rounders in their pockets the following year. The Jets failing to recognize that Zach Wilson is not an NFL quarterback. And look, is Sam Darnold a top 10 quarterback in this league? No. But he's proven this year, at the very least, that he is one of 32 that should be an NFL starter. The Jets had an opportunity to make a decision to get a lot of pieces around him. They whiffed on that. They whiffed on the quarterback. And the ultimate tell for me was Joe Douglas has been very public about this. And he said that basically the process was we put Sam Darnold in the draft room with these players, and we felt Zach was better than those players in the draft. Now, say what you want about Sam Darnold, but you're telling me that Joe Douglas had a higher grade on Zach Wilson, Justin Fields, potentially Mac Jones over Sam Darnold? Yikes. And maybe it is a good thing that the Jets have moved on to find someone that can actually draft the franchise quarterback. The other first-round pick, the Jets did trade up in the first round to pick 14 to select the AVT Elijah Vera Tucker. Now, Elijah Vera Tucker has played well this year. It's kind of curious to see where he might be if he didn't have the 2 Achilles injuries. I gave this a B. Really good guard, but in retrospect, they traded up to get him at 14. Darisaw was the guy the Vikings got at pick 25, which the Jets originally had. He's been a really good left tackle in this league. It's one of those things, too, as much as I love AVT, it doesn't make sense to trade all those aspects to go up and get a guard if it was a tackle. And again, they could have probably played tackle. And if hindsight's 2020, the best thing for the Jets was they just kept AVT at left tackle and developed him to be their left tackle. But they didn't. They tried to make the Becton thing work, which again, that trickle effect. But overall, they got a very good guard. Hopefully the Jets and this new regime continue to bring him back. But I think this was a good pick and probably in this draft, the best player that the Jets got out of it. But then starts to go downhill. Second round pick 34, the Jets took Elijah Moore. He didn't last 24 months. Look, there wasn't a lot of great players in this range, like compared to the previous draft in terms of wide receivers and talent. But this is, again, another second round pick that the Jets used, a top 40 pick in this case, to get a receiver that they couldn't figure out. And again, he's still in the league. He's still with Cleveland, but he's not the player I think a lot of us imagined. They spent a high draft pick on someone that had character issues, and those character issues reared their ugly heads. And again, he didn't last 24 months with the team. So overall, this is a massive, massive F. So the Jets then would start day 3 with Michael Carter, the running back. I gave this a C. Good change of pace back, has been still in the league. You know, someone that had 7 touchdowns, over 1,200 career yards with the Jets. And look, it's a 4th-round pick. You're looking for contributors. I think Michael Carter has proven to be a 53 player on a roster in the league. So overall, a solid pick. Pick number 5 has really trended pick in the 5th round has traded to the right of this, Jamien Sherwood. I gave this a B. Before this season, probably would have given this a C-, D+, but he's become a really good linebacker, this converted safety that they changed into a linebacker. I think that this is probably the best pick they had here on day 3 on this draft, but it did take a lot of time to develop, but now is looking like a solid pick. The next pick was also another 5th rounder. This is Jason Pinnock. I gave this a D- because I was on the edge of giving this a fail, but he is a good NFL player. 6.5 interceptions. This grade, 5 interceptions. My apologies. This grade would have been higher. I would have probably given this a C or a B grade, but here's the problem. They cut him 1 year, and they allowed him to go to the Giants. They allowed a versatile player who can play safety to go to their arch rivals. And look, Pinnock, you can make a case. Is he a great starting safety? Probably not, but he's a starting caliber safety in this league. And what's one thing the Jets are lacking right now? Starting caliber safeties. So you wonder what the Jets roster construction and how they handle that really was. And then we got Hamza Nasruddin. This was, I think, the fail-safe for Sherwood, another risk that they took trying to convert a safety into a linebacker. This is a fail. I gave this a failing grade. And look, I'm always wary about converting guys from positions. I mean, it may be like safety to corner or vice versa, but changing a safety to a linebacker, always a little bit wary. Yes, it's worked with Sherwood, but I would have rather at this point, especially in the construction of the Jets, gotten someone that wasn't as much of a project And unfortunately, this project did not work out. So the Jets had 3 6-round picks. So that was the first of the 6. The second one was Brandon Echols. I gave this a B-. Look, Echols hasn't become a starter, but he's a good depth piece. He's got a nose for the ball. And he's actually a player I kind of hope the Jets keep as a corner piece. Look, I do like that the Jets have some nice depth. I know Quantez Stiggers was a pick they had last year, but Echols is a guy at the right price I would definitely bring back as a good depth piece. So then the final one, especially Echols with 5 career picks, the Jets would round out the draft with Jonathan Marshall. Now, usually late picks, I said it'd be lenient, but Marshall only lasted 1 season, and he was out of the league in short order. Look, this was a draft that, look, when you're the Jets, just look for guys that eventually become members of the 53. I'm not saying they have to be great players, but when they are shortly out of the league very quickly, that is a miss, and that is an opportunity to get a role player to add to the piece. So overall, what is my grade for the 2021 class? It's ugly. It's a D+. It's just underpassing. I think that they had some nice depth pieces, but overall, when you whiff on a franchise quarterback, it drags the grade down significantly. Some pieces took more time to develop, but this, again, the first 2 drafts for Joe Douglas were very ugly. The big question is going to be, how do the next ones turn out? And I do think you know where the next one's going for 2022, a draft which many people consider the magnum opus for Joe Douglas, and really what I think extended his career to 2024. Let's start off with the 4th overall pick. The Jets selected Sauce Gardner. I understand he's had a rough year this year, but I still think you have an incredibly talented corner. Looking at that draft picks again, I don't think there was a great tackle they could have selected at that point. Kayvon Thibodeaux has been a bit of the disappointment. I think for the guys on the board, Sauce was probably, outside of Garrett Wilson, who we'll get to, was probably one of the better players on the board. You're hoping that with a new coaching staff, maybe a new scheme, that Sauce can really flourish next season. Then you got Garrett Wilson, A+ again. So I'm just, spoiler alert, the first 4 picks are all going to be A+, because these were all hits. Garrett Wilson is an incredibly dynamic receiver, going to have another 1,000-yard season despite inconsistent quarterback play. Then Jermaine Johnson, who I, as a top 10 player in the entire draft, fell into the 20s. Jets traded up. I thought brilliant trade, great player. And you see the impact of Jermaine Johnson. I said Jermaine Johnson is never going to be a 15-sack guy, but he's going to be an every down defensive end, stout against the run, and can get 8 to 9 sacks a year. And you've seen the impact. The Jets have lost players to injury over these last couple of years, but Jermaine's probably been one of the biggest one. When they lost him setting the edge, this run defense has looked absolutely horrendous, and here's hoping to a speedy recovery for Jermaine Johnson. Then Breece Hall in the 2nd round, unbelievable running back, home run hitter, another A+. So again, those 4 picks is really what defined Joe Douglas's legacy, and I think really has led to him getting a lot of credit for his drafting. But then, you know what they say, it's not how you start, it's how you finish. So how did the Jets finish the 2022 draft class? In the 3rd round, they selected Jeremy Ruckert. Again, I was high on Ruckert, full disclosure, out of Ohio State, especially the great story with him and his dad being Jet fans growing up. But unfortunately, Ruckert has not developed. He has been a frustrating player for this team, especially when you look at this tight end class. This was a pretty good tight end class, and the Jets could have gone other directions. You had Cade Otton, who has 10 touchdowns with the Buccaneers. You have Jake Ferguson, who's become a very good tight end with the Dallas Cowboys. Both were on the board. The Jets had Ruckert with a higher grade. They went with Ruckert, and there's a good chance Ruckert might not be on this team next year, which is frustrating. After all the wheeling and dealing, the Jets had 2 4th-round picks. The first one was Max Mitchell. Now, for Max Mitchell, I gave this a D. Now, I think a lot of people are expecting an F, but Max Mitchell, I want to give a little bit of the benefit of the doubt to. Don't forget, he had that the blood issue his first year. He doesn't seem to be the same player since that point, and it's frustrating because I think you saw flashes in that first year of what the Jets saw as a versatile player. Again, he's someone that has played guard and tackle. I'm kind of curious, like, with another pick I'm going to mention later on, Is this all his fault? Is it the coaching? Like with the better offensive line coach, can he be a player with the new regime? But overall, I gave this a D. And my final pick final pick in round 4, everyone's favorite, Michael Clemens. Just got to love the penalties, not saying the edge. Look, this is an F. This is an F. And you look, the players on the board when Michael Clemens was drafted: Jack Jones, Isaiah Likely, and Jake Ferguson. Heck, I would have rather had the Jets go on with 2 tight ends as opposed to this pick. Just oof. So overall, what is the grade for the 2022 draft class? I give it a B+. Now, a lot of people are going to say that seems a little bit low. It shouldn't be an A for how they handle the first round. The big thing, too, is it's, to me, if you hit on your first 40 picks, you need to be really good in the first 40, but it's a lot easier to see the talent discrepancy between the top of a class and the bottom of a class. A great GM will find value. And the problem is, you look at the Jets they had 3 valuable picks, a 3rd-round pick and 2 4s. Those are picks that you can look into potentially becoming everyday players for you, and the Jets missed. They have 2 guys that are likely not going to be on this team next year, and the third, you're hoping with right coaching can be developed, but unfortunately, it's left a lot to be desired. So let's head to the 2023 draft, and this pick has aged a lot better than when it initially happened. So we all know what happened. The Jets traded for Aaron Rodgers, which meant they slotted back from 13 to 15. The Jets were laying for Broderick Jones. Patriots traded with the Steelers. So the Steelers drafted Broderick Jones, who's basically unplayable. And the Jets drafted Will McDonald, who in his second season already has 10 sacks. Very talented pass rusher. But I gave this a B+. Look, I'm happy they got a very good pass rusher. I don't think Will McDonald's an every down rusher or an every down player like Jermaine. And the reason I gave this a B+ is there's a lot of great receivers in this draft. And again, the Jets, this is an offensive league. You look at this situation, they had a guy like Bryce Huffenhaus. And again, I think McDonald is developing to a really good player. But when the Jets had good defensive linemen on this team and the year later decided to let them go, this at the time was a bit puzzling, especially when receiver was a need. But overall, the talented player that he's becoming, I gave this a B+, and who knows, eventually this might become an A. The next one's the best pick in the draft. It was Joe Tippmann, the center. I gave this an A. Look, he's been great, durable. I think he's developed into a really good center. I'm hoping with better offensive line coach, who knows, maybe he can take a step and be a potential Pro Bowler. But I feel like the Jets at the very least are set at center and they're set at left tackle. So there's a lot of criticism, Joe Douglas, but finally these last 2 drafts, they were able to get the 2 key pieces on the offensive line that I think are the most important. So this one's an A. But then what happens after the first 2 picks? It goes downhill. Carter Warren, they really touted as being a 2nd-round graded player. In the 4th round, Warren has looked overwhelmed to tackle at times. Again, I give this like Mitchell a D. I'm waiting on giving these guys Fs because I don't love the offensive line coach that they've had. I think that with better coaching, they can be better players. So I'm curious to see if the new regime maybe likes one or the 2 of them, maybe both, but maybe they can develop them. I'm not even saying be starters, but they can be reliable backup players. They still might have value. So this one, the jury's still a little bit out on 2023 and 2024. I tend to look at those picks, give them a little bit more leeway and just seeing what they can eventually become. But the next one was easy. The next pick was easy. Izzy Abanikanda is an F. I mean, this was another player the Jets drafted, 20 years old, electric playmaker, fastest kid in the draft, and they couldn't figure out how to use him. And it's frustrating because you wonder if with better coaching, could Izzy have been a dynamic player? I thought they could use him on kick and punt returns. They didn't use him for that, and he's not on the team anymore. So this is an F. And guys on the board, this got to be frustrating. Puka Nacua and Dontavian Wicks were on the board here in the 5th round. Guys like that were out there. Still talented players in this draft. But the player the Jets picked in the 5th round is no longer on the team. Zaire Barnes was next. He was a 6th-round pick, the first of the 2 6th-round picks. I give this a D+. I think he's solid depth piece. I'm hoping to see a little bit more from him. Then you have Jarek Bernard-Converse as the next pick. I gave this pick a C-. I see a little bit more talent than Barnes. I think he can be a dynamic player. Unfortunately, he's got a bit nicked up in his early career. You're hoping that you can see that talent really translate. but can play multiple positions. I think he could be a very nice depth piece. And here in the 6th round, you want depth piece. And this is probably the only one I gave an F in the 7th round. Actually, spoiler alert, there's another F coming. But I gave Zach Kuntz an F. Look, this is a player that basically the Jets fell in love with the measurables, and we see this a lot with Joe Douglas, the RAS scores. But you wonder if they looked at the tape because Kuntz hasn't been able to get on the field despite all the tight end injuries. I mean, they've had to bring Yeboah back. Can't get on the field, can't figure out a role for him, and I don't think he's going to be a part of this team in 2025. So overall, what do I give the 2023 draft? I give it a C-. If not for the 2 first picks of McDonald and Tippmann, that could have been a very bad draft class like the first 2. So now we get to 2024. Olu Fashanu with the 11th pick. I gave this an A. Look, I think Olu's going to be a great left tackle for a long time. I know there's going to be a lot of people in the comments going to be saying, well, they could have drafted Brock Bowers. They could have drafted Brock Bowers. You know what you can find in round 2, what Sam Laporta taught us? You can find dynamic tight ends in round 2. This list has shown us you can find dynamic tight ends in rounds 2 and 3. You know what you can't find? Franchise left tackles. I think that you have one in Olu. Again, I think this is a guy that we thought at one point the Jets didn't have any shot at getting at the 10th pick. They ended up dropping back a slot for to let the Vikings come up to get J.J. McCarthy, end up getting an extra pick, which they would use in this draft in the 5th round. But overall, I gave this an A. Now, I know some people are going to look at this with Bo Nix and say, should they drafted Bo Nix? But unfortunately, I don't think they have the coaching staff to really develop Bo Nix. But overall, you found the franchise left tackle. But unfortunately for Joe Douglas, it was just too late. You were trying since 2020, and while you finally got it, it's almost like a bit of a tragedy. He finally figures out, but it's too late. The Jets in the 3rd round will go with Malachi Corley. Now, I know a lot of people are going to think I'm just going to give this an F. But unfortunately, I think the Jets, like Malachi and this pitcher, have fumbled how to use him. Malachi Corley showed on this Jets sweep that he's a dynamic playmaker, but you got to find ways to give him the ball. To me, the biggest problem with this Jet coaching staff and with Robert Saleh, and I know a lot of people have been dragging Woody Johnson through the mud, especially recently, but can we be critical of how Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas were bragging in their press conferences, how he was the 5th receiver on their board, how he was ahead of guys like Brian Thomas, who, oh, by the way, just dropped over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns on the Jets with Mac Jones as his quarterback. And then they had the stupid draft day thing with Malachi Corley or else. Look, I think Corley, I'm not going to give him an F yet because I see that he's got physical ability. This is a kid that, unfortunately, I just don't think the Jets know how to use it. They don't know how. They've gotten a square peg, but they're trying to make it fit in a round hole. And it just drives me nuts. And I hope the end of the season they give Malachi Corley what I've been screaming for, the Yak King from college. Let him return kicks. I'm sick and tired of seeing Xavier Gibson return kicks. Let Malachi Corley get some kicks. Let him run a couple of jet sweeps. You ran it once. You almost scored a touchdown. Maybe he got too excited because you never let the kid play. So I think Corley's got some raw talent. I know it's one of those things you want to see him develop. I'm hoping the end of the season they let him just go out there and play a lot. Overall, this is the biggest pick that I think that can sway the most in time. But right now, just the way this whole situation was handling, getting a guy that was a project and a win all year, getting a guy who they didn't have a defined role for is inexcusable. In the 4th round, the Jets then would go with Braylon Allen. I gave this grade a B+. I think Allen has the potential to be a good workhorse for this team. It's just frustrating because I don't think this team relies on the running game enough. Then in the 5th round, I have them with an incomplete grade. Look, this is the only omitted pick, basically, of this draft because, unfortunately, even though I think this was a smart pick, and I still think it was a smart pick at the time, we don't know if Jordan Travis is going to play. We got to see. It's concerning he hasn't even returned from the practice window, and it's been over a year since his injury. So I'll be frank with you guys. I've omitted this pick. Again, this pick doesn't go against the grade. This is the one mulligan I'm going to take in here because, again, I need to see how this plays out. If he's not able to participate early next year, then I'm going to have my grade. But I'm hoping he develops into a backup quarterback, which would be incredibly valuable in this league. But we'll have to see how he recovers from the injury. Isaiah Davis in the 5th round. I gave this a B. I think that this is a dynamic player. I really like that this player, again, I gave this a B because this was part of the Olu trade. So they got him with the extra pick. So that's why this grade's a little higher. I would have probably given this a B- if it wasn't for that, because again, they overloaded at running back, which again, I really like the running back room. I think with the right coaching staff, this could be a really fun trio of backs, but it's just frustrating because they have all these backs they never want to use, but then they could have addressed other needs on this team. The last couple picks, Quantez Stiggers, I gave this a C-. Look, I think this is another grade that has a chance to grow. I really like Stiggers. I thought he looked pretty good in his first start. I'm really excited to see how he plays out there in the season. That grade could also be raised. And then finally, Jalen Key, Mr. Irrelevant. Look, I gave this an F. I hated the fact, too, that, again, Woody Johnson and the Jets decided to keep it just so they could have, quote, the Mr. Irrelevant, which drives me nuts. But here's the big thing. Everyone's going to go nuts over this. But, look, it's the 257th player in the draft. You're just looking for a guy that can make the roster. And with Key, they got a player that just wasn't going to be an NFL body, and it's just frustrating that they wasted a draft pick. So what is the verdict after the final draft? I gave them a C for 2024. Could be working toward a C plus B minus, depending on Malachi Corley and Quantez Stiggers looks out. What is the overall draft grade for Joe Douglas as the GM of the New York Jets? It is a C minus, which I think is appropriate. It's below average. You have one great draft that really pulled this up. When you really look at the whole picture outside of those 4 picks in 2022, that is what's saving Joe Douglas. Because if it wasn't for that draft, that's probably the reason he got to stay in 2024. This is looking more like a D plus grade. Because the biggest thing, too, is yes, Douglas saw first-round talent. He was able to mostly get that, but you look, the biggest things for this team, what this team is needed, was a franchise left tackle. They missed on that until this year. This team needed to address the offensive line. They, outside of Olu this year and Tippmann, they weren't an AVT. They had trouble drafting tackles or guards, even for depth. Playmakers was also the big one. The Jets missed on a lot of playmakers. Yes, they got Breece Hall. Yes, they did a decent job in the running back room this year, but they missed horribly on Izzy. They have not done anything for the tight end position. They've left a lot of talented tight ends on the board, and the one they have selected has not worked out, which is incredibly frustrating. They missed on the franchise quarterback. Like, you look, like the biggest things that teams need in the NFL, quarterback, tackle, you want playmakers. And look, the Jets, they whiffed on the Zach Wilson situation. They handled it poorly. They could have kept Sam Darnold. They could have gone a boatload of picks. They could have gone 5 different directions, and probably they chose the worst path of all of them. And then on top of that, in the misses at tackle, you look at the wide receivers. The Jets had multiple opportunities to get the receivers right. They had multiple chances. They have taken, outside of Garrett Wilson, 3 other receivers in the top 65 of the draft. And 2 of them were abject failures, and one of them is looking like it could be trending the wrong way if they can't find the right coach or that they don't have a role for him. They have arguably, outside of Conklin, one of the worst depth at tight end. They didn't even bother to address the tight end in the draft. They didn't get playmakers. Now, look, the Jets had some good hits. Defensive line, they did pretty good. Some of the linebacking, safety. The defensive side of the ball, they did okay. But you look at the offense, which has been the Jets' Achilles heel for years. The Jets missed on a lot of opportunities. And when you look at some of the prospects that the Jets missed, especially in the middle rounds, that were on the board that could have helped this team contribute, it is incredibly frustrating. And I do think that this is a fitting grade of a C- for Joe. Because again, did he fail miserably over all that tenure? No. But like the grade says, it just wasn't good enough. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here for Rich Sports Talk. New to the channel, make sure to give us a like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our New York Jets content. We go live after every single Jets game to give our thoughts and feedbacks with the live stream. During that, you can use our new Super Chat feature to jump the line and get your comment heard first. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our latest videos, and especially as we head to the offseason, the GM search, the offseason, and especially the NFL draft. We will have a boatload of NFL draft content that you are not going to want to miss here. But thank you, everyone, for joining us here. You can also check us out wherever podcasts are streaming. Until next time, I'm your host, Nolan Rich, and this is Rich Sports Talk.